Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. 今日の動画では日本語の自然な話し方について話していきたいと思います。学習者にはよくこういう問題がありますよね。言葉が自然に流せないっていうこと。それぞれの母語によって話し方や表現が異なります。自分の日本語はそういう影響を受けます。By observing the speech patterns often exhibited by native Japanese speakers, we can adopt these into our own speech to make our Japanese sound more natural. In this video, I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks on how you can make your Japanese sound more natural. So let's get started. The first trick for you is do not be too direct when you're communicating, especially when you're saying no to something. When you're declining someone, it's common to express regret or disappointment and be gentle when turning someone down. Saying no outright can come across as harsh and possibly convey a lack of interest or enthusiasm towards the other person. Especially if you're talking to a friend, a partner, a co-worker, or a boss, you don't want to run the risk of accidentally offending them. And Japanese is a high context language where a lot of reading between the lines goes on. That's why the saying 空気を読む is a thing here. You might not be saying no outright, but this is often communicated in other ways such as tone, body language, and your choice of words. You can do this in several ways. Long pauses, stating the reason or point of conflict before ending your sentences, or rather not ending them by using a conjunction like but, or expressing difficulty in fulfilling the request. So instead of doing this, ねえねえ、土曜日にどこかに行かない？土曜日には行けない。ごめんなさい、土曜日はダメ。もう予定を決めたから行けない。残業するから都合が悪い。Instead, it would sound more natural like this. ねえねえ、土曜日にどこかに行かない？土曜日はちょっとね。予定が決まっちゃったんだけど。ごめんね、ちょっと残業しなきゃ。Even though you're not explicitly saying no, your response is obviously implying your answer to your partner. You're basically laying it out for them and letting them come to that conclusion themselves. On that note, I would be cautious about using strong negative words, especially outside of the context of making a joke or saying something light-hearted. Again, this is due to the possibility of coming across as too harsh. For example, if you wanted to express that you weren't very good at dancing, you could say 踊るのが下手です. But 下手 as an adjective has a very strong negative meaning, which is more like saying I'm awful at dancing, and it could come across as quite harsh and possibly like you're complaining. Instead, using a less strong word like 苦手, so like 踊るのが苦手です, or the negative form of a positive word like 得意じゃないです。踊るのが得意じゃないです still conveys that you're not particularly confident in your dancing without coming across as too harsh. It sounds a lot more gentle like this. So when you're speaking, consider using words that sound less strong or harsh. The next tip I want to give you is to speak in short, quick sentences. Especially when you're starting out, you might feel the need to speak in long, perfect sentences as much as possible. But realistically, that's not how Japanese, or in fact most languages, are spoken. In Japanese, it's really common to not fully finish your sentences, but instead end on a conjunction like but or though. I think this goes back to Japanese being a high context language once again, but you're leaving the space for whoever you're speaking to fill in the gaps on their own. It's also not unusual to omit the topic of the sentence and then state it afterwards. For example, if you were to ask, was yesterday's sushi tasty? You could say, 昨日の寿司は美味しかったか? Which is still correct, but if you want to sound more natural, you could also say, 美味しかったか? 昨日の寿司は. So instead of one long sentence, you split it into two shorter sentences. Additionally, when the person you're talking to is the one that raises the topic of the conversation, it's normal to quote the topic with the quotation particle te instead of using the topic particle wa. So it's like you're quoting and confirming what you just heard. So if we go back to the previous example of was yesterday's sushi tasty, you could answer with 昨日の寿司って美味しかったよ. So it's kind of like you're restating the topic with a rhetorical question. You could technically say 昨日の寿司は美味しかったよ, which wouldn't be wrong, but it would be a little redundant since you're using more words than you need. Remember, Japanese is a high context language and you want to be as efficient and concise with your communication as possible. And the third point I want to touch on is to drop the pronouns. Once again, Japanese is a high context language. As such, pronouns aren't often used because it's usually pretty easy to tell who you're talking about, especially if it's yourself. This is not something you should be using all the time if you want to sound natural, unless there is someone else also being mentioned in the conversation and you want to distinguish yourself from them, or you want to place a strong emphasis on something about yourself. For example, if you want to say, I'm studying Japanese, you could technically say, 私は日本語を勉強しています. But it would sound quite unnatural because you could just say, 日本語を勉強しています, and it would easily be interpreted as exactly the same thing. 日本語うまいですよね。どうやってこんなに喋れるんですか? 私は日本語を勉強しています。私は去年日本に留学したことがあります. See what I mean? In this context, it's pretty clear that you yourself are the topic of this conversation, so there really is no need for any pronouns. And if we were to try that again, 日本語うまいですよね。どうやってこんなに喋れるんですか? 日本語を勉強しています。去年日本に留学したことがあります. See how that flows a lot better because you're not repeating yourself? And when you're talking about someone else as the topic of the conversation, it's also common to drop pronouns and instead refer to them by their name or title. So like try not to use あなた or 君 or お前 if you're a guy, unless it's someone that you're really close with and you have a casual relationship with. If you're talking to a superior at work, this might be their title like 社長, 課長, 部長, or if it's a friend, it could just be their name with the suffix kun for guys or chan for girls and children. And if you're talking to a customer, it would just be their title as well, so like お客様 with the suffix sama, or just their name and the suffix sama. In a real life situation, it might look something like this. 最近うちの収益が上昇したそうだね。みんなお疲れ。社長様のおかげで我々は全力で企画を遂行させていただきました。クロエちゃんはリンゴが好き？うん、好きだよ。スーちゃんはお客様へのお願いを申し上げます。So long story short, drop pronouns whenever possible and switch to names and titles instead. One of the biggest challenges when speaking and practicing Japanese is the lack of grammar and vocabulary. Two fundamental elements needed to build sentences. If you don't have sufficient vocabulary, you'll find it quite difficult to speak and communicate effectively. When it comes to expanding your vocabulary, today's sponsor, MochiKanji Learn Japanese, is here to help. This app offers various courses to meet the different demands of Japanese learners. If you're preparing for the JLPT, you'll find courses from N5 through to N2 levels, and there's even a write feature where you can practice writing kanji stroke by stroke. This app includes mnemonics for each kanji, which are tips to help you remember the kanji easily. So whether you're studying IT, nursing, or with popular textbooks like Minna no Nihongo or Genki, MochiKanji has courses to suit all your learning needs. The app also features a flashcard system with furigana, audio, and colorful visuals which help to reinforce pronunciation and pitch accent to make them more engaging, and this is especially helpful if you're a visual learner. Daily quizzes keep your practice interesting by combining language skills in a way that's never repetitive. One of the most engaging aspects of this app is its conversation feature, where you can chat with adorable characters who are ready to talk to you about common everyday topics such as hobbies, asking for help, or ordering at a restaurant. This is a fun and interactive way to practice speaking Japanese, offering a dynamic way to improve your conversation skills. You can converse with them on a wide range of subjects, which help make learning and speaking Japanese more lively and less intimidating. But that's just the start. MochiKanji makes learning Japanese easy and effective with tools like its Golden Time feature, which uses spaced repetition to help you learn vocabulary at the optimal time for memory retention. It sends you helpful reminders whenever it's time to review, so that you never forget to keep your learning on track. In addition to conversation practice, MochiKanji also offers comprehensive lessons which include reading, writing, and listening exercises. You can engage with vocabulary in a holistic way, removing any confusion about what you should be focusing on. The digital notebook is another standout feature which organizes your learned vocabulary into 5 memorization levels from beginner to long-term retention, so you can easily see your progress. And don't forget about Mochi Garden, where you can set study goals and grow cute plants by staying consistent with your studies. Perfect for keeping you motivated. Whether you're on mobile or PC, MochiKanji makes it easier than ever to learn Japanese. You can go download the app via the App Store or Google Play Store, or access the website if you're on PC, and these are all linked down in the description. And now, on to the next tip, which is to use filler words, sounds, or aitsuji whenever possible. When we're speaking English, sometimes we use sounds like ums, ahs, aha, that sort of thing. We use filler words to kind of fill up the blank spaces in our communication when we're thinking or trying to recall something. Aitsuji are basically simple expressions which you can use to affirm to the speaker that you heard and understood what they said. And this is often combined with body language or facial expressions like shock, surprise, nodding, bowing, etc. There's way too many for me to go through them all, but I'm going to show you a couple of examples of filler words in Japanese and aitsuji. Using these in your communication will have your Japanese sounding much more natural in no time. The next thing I want to share with you is to use Japanese expressions of saying things instead of translating directly from English. I think this is really important if you want to speak natural Japanese instead of just sounding like you're speaking Japanese from English or any other language, if that makes sense. This can be quite difficult to do in the beginning, especially when you have a limited knowledge in the language, but as you start to expand your vocabulary and learn new verbs and expressions, practice using these as much as possible. For example, if you're in distress and you want to say, "What should I do?" Translating from English would be like, "Nani o shio," which nobody really says. Instead, you could say, "Dou shio" or "Dou sureba ii," which sounds far more natural in Japanese. Like, why do we use "do" and not "nani"? Because we are focusing on how something should be dealt with, how the situation should be taken care of, as opposed to being heavily fixated on the what. When you start to get a feel for why things are said the way they're said, you start to naturally embody someone who understands and can read these nuances at a moment's notice. It takes practice and some experience to get to that point, but if you make a conscious effort to pick up on these nuances as you go and practice applying them to your own Japanese, you will get there in no time. The last tip I want to leave you guys is to know when to be polite and when to be casual. And this goes both ways. If you're too formal in a casual situation or too casual in a situation where you should be more formal, this can come across as either robotic, unnatural, or even impolite. As a general rule of thumb, it's normal to be more polite to people who are older than you or in the workplace to those who have seniority. It's usually okay to be more casual when you're talking to family, friends, people that you're close to, or those who are around the same age as you. But definitely don't go using desu masu with your friends or stuff, because it'll make you sound super distant and they'll probably even question whether you see them as a friend or not. On the other hand, if you're working in a Japanese workplace, desu masu should be the minimum level of politeness that you're using, if not keigo. I've heard that this can be quite tricky even for native Japanese speakers, so I wouldn't worry too much about messing up every now and then. When in doubt though, like if you're unsure of what your relationship with the other person is like, I'd personally want to stay on the more polite side to avoid potentially coming across as rude. I feel like it can sometimes be difficult to judge when it's safe to switch from polite to casual speech with someone, and there isn't really like a concrete answer to this other than to use your intuition to decide. Like, especially if the other person was being really friendly and switches to casual speech with you, I would take that as a cue to do the same. Like, when I was still taking private lessons with my Japanese teacher back in Sydney, it was always desu masu because we still had that teacher-student relationship. But now that I'm not taking classes anymore, but we're still keeping in touch and chatting and stuff, like it's just super casual and chill between us. Like, especially if it's just an Insta or a line message, there's really no need for desu masu in those circumstances when we're just catching up on life. So definitely read the situation and use your intuition to decide. So that's going to be it for this video. Learning Japanese later on in life doesn't mean that you can't speak naturally with it. It just takes a little bit more time and effort. I hope that you learned something helpful from this video, and if you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye!